Ever feel like when you're doing yoga, you're missing like a user manual for your body?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're doing the poses, but you're not really sure what's happening inside.
Yeah.
Well, today we're diving deep into Yoga Anatomy by Leslie Kaminoff to uncover some of those secrets of how our bodies actually work in those poses.
It's going to be exciting. We're going to learn so much.
Yes.
What I love about Kaminoff is that he starts with something that we all do, and that's breathe.
Okay.
And he uses the breath and even the structure of a single cell to explain these big yoga concepts.
Okay. I have to admit, when I first read The Cell is a Yoga Guide, I was a little skeptical.
Right.
But Kaminoff actually connects those ancient-sounding terms like prana and apana to something that I think is super relatable,
Yes.
which is how a single cell takes in nutrients, which is prana, and gets rid of waste, which is apana.
It's brilliant. He's basically saying that at the most fundamental level, our bodies are designed for this constant flow of energy and resources. And just like a cell needs that balance of taking things in and letting things go, our bodies need that balance too. And that's where these two other really big yoga concepts come in, sthira and sukha.
Right. Sthira, that grounded stability.
Yes.
And sukha, that sense of ease and flow. It's like finding that sweet spot where you're feeling strong and supported, but you're not feeling tense or restricted.
Exactly. It's not about being a pretzel or anything like that.
Right.
It's about finding that balance in each pose, in each breath.
Yeah, it's so true. And that brings us to the diaphragm,
Okay.
that muscle we usually associate with breathing.
Right.
But Kaminoff calls it the engine not just of our breath, but of three-dimensional shape change in our torso.
Right.
That's a big job for one muscle.
Yeah, it's a big job for one muscle, and it's why understanding how the diaphragm works is so essential for yoga. So often we hear about belly breathing versus chest breathing, but Kaminoff actually argues that it's not really about where we feel the breath. It's about how efficiently our diaphragm is working to create these subtle internal shape changes that allow our lungs to expand and contract.
So it's less about forcing a belly breath and more about understanding how to use our diaphragm effectively.
Exactly. And he uses this great analogy of a car. So the diaphragm is like the engine. It's always working in the background.
Okay.
But just like you can drive your car in different ways, we can breathe in different ways. So those accessory muscles, the ones that we engage when we're like gasping for air or trying to like squeeze into a tight parking spot, those are like shifting gears.
Okay.
They have their place, but they shouldn't be doing all the heavy lifting all the time.
Okay. So I'm starting to see how this all connects. So I can technically like chest breathe my way through yoga, but I might be missing out on those deeper gears for more control and stability.
Yes, exactly. And it gets even more interesting when we connect this back to apana, that downward and outward flow of energy.
Okay.
Kaminoff links that to the pelvic floor.
Okay.
Yes, those muscles.
Wow.
He explains how specific yogic techniques, like Mula Bandha, engage those muscles to enhance that downward flow, promoting a sense of grounding and stability.
So yoga is not just about stretching and breathing. It's like this intricate system of levers and pulleys, and we're learning how to use them all effectively.
Precisely. And speaking of intricate systems, let's move from the cell, the smallest unit of the body, to the structure that literally holds us upright, the spine.
Right, the spine. Before this deep dive, I have to admit, I thought of the spine as like one long bone, honestly.
Right.
Not the most nuanced view.
Well, it's a common misconception.
Yeah.
But the spine is this marvel of engineering. And again, it showcases that balance of sthira and sukha because you have the individual vertebrae providing stability, like strong building blocks. But then you have the discs and the ligaments and those little facet joints that allow for all that beautiful fluid movement.
And suddenly I'm very grateful for those discs and ligaments. I am curious, how does Kaminoff break down all the different ways that our spines can move?
He explains that there are 5 types of spinal movement. So there's flexion, like when you bend forward to touch your toes.
Okay.
There's extension, which is like reaching your arms overhead. There's lateral flexion, which is side bending. And then there's axial rotation, those delicious twists. But then he adds a 5th one that even surprised me, axial extension.
Axial extension. Okay, that sounds intense, like beyond just standing up straight.
It is. It's definitely subtler than the others, but incredibly powerful. So imagine lengthening your spine from the crown of your head all the way down to your tailbone,
Okay.
while simultaneously reducing both the natural curves in your back and that inward curve of the lower back.
Wow. Okay. I can see why that's not a movement we just naturally do.
Huh.
What's the benefit of finding that axial extension?
What Kaminoff says is that it creates space within the body, a sense of lightness and expansion.
Nice.
Yeah. And it's something that we can access in so many poses, even something as simple as Tadasana mountain pose.
So even in stillness, there's this dynamic interplay of forces that's happening within the spine. It making me think about those cues we hear in yoga, like lengthen your tailbone toward the floor or lift from the crown of your head. They're not just about aesthetics. They're about tapping into these very specific anatomical actions that are happening within the spine.
Exactly. And that's what makes Kaminoff's work so brilliant, because he bridges that gap between the physical practice of yoga and the deeper anatomical knowledge that can enhance our understanding and experience of the poses.
Yeah.
And he does it all while making it really engaging and relatable.
Speaking of relatable, let's talk about a part of the body that often gets overlooked in yoga until it starts screaming at us, our feet.
Yes. The unsung heroes of our yoga practice. Kaminoff dedicates a surprising amount of time to these often neglected body parts.
Yeah.
He calls them our foundation.
Yeah.
And for good reason.
It's so true, because we're essentially asking our feet to be our base of support in so many poses, and it's easy to forget about that.
Yeah.
But then when you actually think about it, like all the tiny bones and muscles and ligaments that make up the foot, it's kind of mind-boggling.
Absolutely. And he uses Tadasana, mountain pose, which we often think of as this simple standing posture, to illustrate the complexity of what's happening in our feet.
Okay.
He points out that within those seemingly still feet, there are 28 bones, 3 arches, and a whole network of muscles working together to create both stability and adaptability.
Okay, so mountain pose is like a master class in foot anatomy, disguised as a simple standing posture.
Yes.
Very sneaky. And something else I found super relatable is he talks about how our modern lifestyles, with all the sitting and the shoe wearing, have really weakened our feet.
He does, and he suggests that consciously engaging those foot muscles in standing poses can be incredibly therapeutic. It's like giving our feet a much-needed wake-up call.
So those micro adjustments that I'm making in mountain pose to like find my balance are actually waking up muscles that have been dormant for years.
You got it. And that awareness, that activation, it can ripple outward, affecting not just our feet, but our entire posture and alignment.
That's incredible. This is already blowing my mind, and we're just getting started. And you know what else is a great example of this like mind-body connection? Sitting. Like, we spend so much time in chairs these days.
I know, right?
It's easy to forget that our bodies weren't really designed for it.
It's true. And Kaminoff, he talks about how, in many cultures, sitting on the floor is the norm.
Yeah.
And, those folks tend to have a lot fewer back problems.
Which makes sense when you think about it. We've gone from like squatting and sitting cross-legged for millennia to like parking ourselves in chairs that force our bodies into these like really awkward and unnatural positions.
Right.
My lower back is feeling personally attacked right now.
Right. I know, me too. But the good news is yoga offers a way to reclaim some of that, natural flexibility and strength that we might have lost along the way.
Right.
And Kaminoff talks about how seated poses, when they're done with awareness and proper alignment, can help to restore those natural curves of the spine.
It's like giving our bodies a chance to like hit the reset button.
Right.
To remember how to sit in a way that's actually both comfortable and supportive.
Exactly. He even points out that the word asana can literally be translated as seat.
Oh, wow.
So like, in a way, all these yoga poses are ultimately about creating a stable and comfortable seat for our physical and energetic bodies.
Okay, but for those of us who like didn't grow up sitting on the floor, finding that comfortable seat can be a process.
Yeah.
I'm always like fiddling with blankets and blocks and things, trying to get comfortable.
I hear you. And I think, it's important. Kaminoff reassures us that using props is not cheating.
Right.
It's actually, in fact, it's often the key to unlocking better alignment and actually finding that sense of sthira and sukha.
It's like he's saying, like, work smarter, not harder.
Exactly. He gives the example of using a cushion or a blanket to elevate the hips in seated poses.
Okay.
So when our hips are higher than our knees, it allows those natural curves of the spine to kind of re-emerge, reducing strain and allowing for a more effortless, upright posture.
So those props aren't just about comfort. They're actually really powerful tools for like improving our alignment and deepening our understanding of the poses.
Precisely. And once we have that stable foundation, we can really start to explore those subtleties of the poses.
And there are so many seated poses to explore. Some of my favorites are those forward bends, like Janusarsasana, head to knee pose. But I'll be honest, sometimes I approach them as like, How far forward can I get my nose to my knee?
I think we've all been there, right? But what Kaminoff challenges us to do is to look beyond that, like external shape of the pose,
Okay.
and tune into those subtle internal actions that are
I
happening.
like that.
So, in head to knee pose, for example, he highlights the importance of lengthening the spine rather than just rounding the back.
Yeah, because if you're just focusing on getting your head to your knee, you're probably like collapsing in your chest and rounding your lower back.
Exactly. And he also talks about the importance of engaging that like back line of the body, from the heel all the way up to the crown of the head
Okay.
to create that length and space in the spine.
It's like he's reminding us that even in a seemingly simple forward bend, there's this beautiful interplay of muscle actions that are happening.
Yes, and breath.
Oh, right, of course.
He emphasizes how using the breath can help us deepen into the pose and access those deeper stretches. So inhaling to lengthen, exhaling to release a little further.
I love that he brings it back to the breath again and again. It's such a good reminder that the breath is always there. It's this powerful tool that we can use to enhance our practice.
Absolutely. And speaking of breath, let's talk about another category of poses that can really challenge our relationship with the breath. And that's kneeling poses.
Okay, yes. Kneeling poses. I have a love-hate relationship with these.
Yeah,
Because on the one hand, they can feel so good, especially for opening up my hips and quads.
right.
But on the other hand, I've definitely had moments in poses like camel pose, where I just feel like I can't breathe.
Yeah, you're not alone.
Hmm.
Kaminoff acknowledges that kneeling poses can be challenging for the breath,
Okay.
especially those that involve deep back bends.
Which makes sense because when you think about it, you're essentially like folding your torso in half,
Right.
which doesn't leave a lot of room for your diaphragm to move freely.
Exactly. But he also emphasizes the importance of finding stability and support in these poses, which can actually help to create more space for the breath.
Okay.
And he uses the example of Ustrasana, camel pose, to illustrate this point.
Oh, camel pose. That's a great example. I always feel it in my lower back. And sometimes it feels amazing, and sometimes it feels a little scary.
Yeah.
What are some of the key things that Kaminoff highlights in that pose?
Well, he talks about the importance of grounding through the shins and knees, creating that stable base from which to lift the chest and arch the back.
Okay.
He also emphasizes the role of the core muscles in supporting the spine and preventing us from collapsing into that lower back.
So it's not just about how far back you can bend. It's about finding that core stability and control to support the breath and protect the spine.
Precisely. And he even connects this back to the concept of sthira and sukha. So in camel pose, we're finding that balance between the effort of lifting the chest and arching the back, sthira, and the ease of allowing the breath to flow freely, sukha.
It's like that Goldilocks principle again. Not too much, not too little.
Exactly. And, kneeling poses can also be fantastic for accessing those deep hip rotators,
Oh, yes.
which are often so tight from sitting all day.
Oh, yes. Those hip rotators. I've heard of a muscle called the piriformis that's often involved in hip and lower back pain. Does Kaminoff talk about that one?
He does. And he uses a pose called Ika Pada Rajakapadasana, one-legged king pigeon pose, to illustrate how this kneeling posture can really target that piriformis muscle.
Ah, pigeon pose. Another one of those poses that can either feel amazing or excruciating depending on the day.
Right.
So true.
But he emphasizes the importance of approaching these deeper stretches with patience and awareness,
Okay.
rather than forcing our bodies into the shape. He even talks about, this protective mechanism in our muscles called the spindle reflex
I've heard of that.
that resists overstretching.
So if we go too far too fast, our muscles are basically nope, not ready for that.
Right.
And they contract to protect themselves.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah, so holding those deeper stretches for, at least a minute or two allows those spindles to relax,
Okay.
and then the muscles can truly lengthen.
It's like we're having conversation with our bodies, listening to those subtle cues and responding with kindness and respect.
I love that.
Yeah.
And speaking of listening to our bodies, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about a category of poses that I think often evokes the sense of surrender and release. Supine poses.
Ah, yes. Those delicious poses where we get to lie down. Sign me up.
Right.
I love those.
Kaminoff describes supine poses as an opportunity to release into gravity's embrace, with savasana, corpse pose, being the ultimate expression of that surrender.
I think Savasana might be the most challenging pose for me
Yeah.
because it's so hard to quiet my mind and truly let go.
I hear you. But as Kaminoff reminds us, even in stillness, there's a lot going on beneath the surface.
Yeah.
Right. Our bodies are constantly working to maintain balance and support our vital functions.
So even when we're like lying down, our bodies are still hard at work.
They are. And supine poses can be surprisingly active. They can engage the muscles of the front body.
Oh, right. Like those abs we all love to hate.
Yeah,
I hadn't even thought about that, but it makes sense. Like when else are we spending so much time like consciously engaging our abdominal muscles?
Exactly. And he talks about how poses like Dvipadipitham, two-legged table pose, which involves lifting the hips off the floor,
Okay.
can be a great way to strengthen that core and improve spinal stability.
And I'm guessing he also like connects this back to the breath.
He does. He explains how coordinating the movement of the hips with the breath can enhance the flow of prana and apana,
Nice.
promoting a sense of energy and vitality while also encouraging this deep sense of relaxation.
It's amazing how he manages to like weave all these different concepts together, like anatomy and breath and these ancient yogic principles.
It's true.
It's giving me a whole new appreciation for like the depth and richness of this practice.
Me too.
Yeah.
And speaking of depth, let's dive into a category of supine poses that often, I think, elicits this mix of awe and trepidation. Inversions.
Inversions. Okay. I have to admit, I get a little nervous with inversions.
Yeah.
Because all that weight on my neck, it just feels a bit scary.
I understand. But Kaminoff addresses those fears head on,
Okay.
emphasizing the importance of building a strong foundation and listening to our bodies.
Well, that's reassuring. Where do we even begin to build that strong foundation for inversions?
He actually starts with a seemingly simple pose, Viparita Karani, legs up the wall pose.
Oh, legs up the wall. I love that pose.
Great.
It feels so good after a long day.
Right. And while it might look passive,
Yeah.
Kaminoff points out that it's actually doing a lot for us. It helps to calm the nervous system, reduce stress and anxiety, and even improve circulation.
And it's so accessible. You don't need any fancy props or equipment.
Right.
You can literally do it anywhere you can find a wall.
Exactly. And he connects this pose to the concept of apana, explaining how elevating the legs can encourage that downward flow of energy,
Okay.
promoting that sense of grounding and release.
It's like giving your internal systems a gentle nudge in the right direction.
Precisely. And once we feel comfortable with legs up the wall, we can start to explore other inversions like Salamba Sarvangasana, supported shoulder stand.
Okay. Shoulder stand. Now, that's one that I'm always a bit intimidated by. Like, am I really supposed to have all that weight on my neck?
I hear you. But Kaminoff, he breaks it down in a way that makes it feel much less scary.
Okay, good.
He emphasizes the importance of using our muscles to support the weight,
Okay.
rather than just collapsing into our necks.
So it's less about like balancing on our necks and more about like creating this like stable, supportive structure with our entire upper body.
Exactly. He talks about drawing the shoulder blades down and in, lifting the chest, and engaging the core to lengthen the spine.
It sounds like a full body workout.
It is. And he even talks about how the position of the head and neck can affect the alignment of the spine.
Okay.
So if we tuck our chins too much, it can compress the back of the neck.
Yeah.
But if we lift our chins too much, it can strain the front of the neck.
So it's like that Goldilocks spot again.
You got it.
Not too much, not too little.
And he reminds us that even in an inversion, like shoulder stand, the breath is still our anchor.
Okay, I can see how that might be challenging. Like, it's hard enough to breathe deeply when you're upside down.
Right.
Let alone, like, trying to engage your core and, like, maintain all these different alignment points.
Right, but he emphasizes the importance of finding a smooth, even breath, even if it's not a deep breath.
Okay.
And he suggests focusing on the exhale, which can help to lengthen the spine and create more space in the chest.
So even in shoulder stand, we're still coming back to those foundational principles of alignment, engagement, and breath. It's amazing how those principles apply to, like, every pose, no matter how challenging.
It's true.
It's incredible.
And speaking of challenging, let's talk about another inversion that often, elicits a mix of awe and intimidation. Urdhva Dhanurasana, upward bow, or wheel pose.
Okay, wheel pose. Now, that's
What?
one I've always admired from afar, but never thought I'd actually be able to do. It just looks so extreme.
It's definitely an advanced pose.
Yeah.
But again, Kaminoff breaks it down in a way that makes it feel much less daunting.
Okay, good.
He emphasizes that it's not just about backbending.
Right.
It's about creating this balanced relationship between strength and flexibility throughout the entire body.
So where do we even begin to, approach a pose as challenging as wheel pose?
He actually suggests starting on the ground in a supine position,
Okay.
the pose called Setubandha Sarvangasana bridge pose.
Oh, bridge pose. I love that pose. It feels so good for opening up the front of my body.
Right. And it shares many similarities with wheel pose in terms of the muscles being engaged and the overall shape of the spine.
Okay, I can see that. You're lifting your hips, arching your back, and opening your chest in both poses.
Exactly. So he suggests using bridge pose as an opportunity to build strength and awareness in those muscles that support the spine,
Okay.
particularly the erector spinae muscles that run along either side of the spine,
Okay.
and the gluteus maximus muscles, those big muscles in the buttocks.
Okay, so we're strengthening those muscles in bridge pose. But how do we transition that strength to wheel pose, where our hands and feet are on the floor?
He suggests practicing a variation of bridge pose where we lift up onto the balls of our feet, keeping the heels lifted off the floor.
Oh.
And this helps to engage the muscles of the legs, particularly the quadriceps and the hamstrings,
Oh, yeah.
which are essential for lifting up into wheel pose.
That's a great tip. And it makes sense to strengthen those leg muscles because they're doing a lot of work in wheel pose.
Absolutely. He also talks about the importance of externally rotating the upper arms in wheel pose,
Okay.
which helps to create more space in the chest and shoulders.
Externally rotating the arms. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah. It means turning the upper arms outward
Okay.
so that the elbow creases are facing forward rather than towards each other.
Oh, okay. I can picture that. So we're not just like pushing straight up from the floor. We're also creating this like outward rotation in the arms to create more space and stability in the shoulders.
Exactly. And he emphasizes that this action of externally rotating the arms should come from the muscles of the upper back,
Okay.
not from forcing the elbows to straighten.
So it's another example of engaging those deeper stabilizing muscles
Yeah.
rather than just relying on like the big superficial muscles.
Precisely. And he reminds us that even in a challenging pose, like wheel pose, the breath is still our anchor.
Right.
He suggests finding a smooth, even breath and using the exhale to help lengthen the spine and deepen the back bend.
I can imagine it would be tempting to like hold your breath in wheel pose.
I know, right?
It's such an intense pose.
But he emphasizes the importance of maintaining a steady breath, even if it's not a deep breath, to help calm the nervous system and prevent us from feeling overwhelmed.
Okay. So we've talked about like headstand and wheel pose. Are there any other inversions that like Kaminoff highlights?
He actually dedicates a whole chapter to arm balances, which are essentially inversions that involve balancing on our hands rather than on our heads or forearms. Oh, right. Arm balances. I almost forgot about this.
Yeah.
They're like a whole other world of inversions.
They are. And he starts by acknowledging that arm balances can be intimidating.
Yeah,
But he also emphasizes that they're incredibly rewarding.
I can imagine. There's something about being able to balance on your hands that just seems so empowering.
Exactly. And he breaks down the mechanics of arm balances in a way that makes them feel much more accessible.
Okay.
So he talks about the importance of distributing the weight evenly through the hands, engaging those core muscles to stabilize the body, and finding that smooth, even breath.
It sounds like those same principles we've been talking about all along: alignment, engagement, and breath.
Exactly. And he emphasizes that arm balances are not just about upper body strength.
Right.
They require a lot of core strength, flexibility in the wrists and shoulders,
Yeah.
and a willingness to trust our bodies.
And I'm guessing practicing against a wall is always a good idea, especially when you're like first learning these poses. Absolutely. He encourages us to use the wall as a prop to help us find our balance and build confidence.
You know, it's funny. We often think of like flexibility as being like the key to inversions,
Right.
but you're really highlighting how much it's about strength and stability,
Yes.
like throughout the entire body,
Absolutely.
to be able to do those poses safely and effectively.
It's about creating that solid foundation from which we can like safely and confidently explore those upside down positions.
Yeah.
And speaking of solid foundations, let's talk about one of the most, iconic inversions of all. Headstand.
Okay, headstand. Salamba Sirsasana, right? I'll admit, this is one that I'm always a little intimidated by.
Yeah,
The thought of putting all that weight on my head and neck just makes me nervous.
I understand. Headstand often evokes that mix of fascination and fear.
Right.
But as with everything else we've discussed, Kaminoff breaks it down in a way that makes it feel much more approachable.
Okay, good.
So he starts by emphasizing that it's not actually about balancing on your head. It's about creating this tripod of support with the forearms and the crown of the head.
Ah, okay. So it's more like distributing the weight evenly rather than putting it all on the head.
Precisely. He talks about creating this like triangular base of support with the forearms shoulder width apart and the hands forming that cup around the back of the head.
Okay.
And this helps to distribute the weight evenly and creates a lot more stability.
And what about the neck? I'm still a little worried about the neck.
Yeah, he addresses that concern directly.
Okay.
He emphasizes the importance of engaging the muscles of the neck and shoulders to support the weight,
Okay.
rather than letting the head and neck just like dangle.
Okay, so we're actively lifting through the neck and shoulders rather than just like passively hanging upside down.
Right.
Okay, that makes me feel a lot better.
He talks about imagining that you could lift the head away from the floor if you needed to, even though it's resting on the floor for support.
Okay.
It's more about engaging those muscles,
Yeah,
creating space and length in the spine, even though we're upside down.
that's a great image.
Right.
Yeah.
And he also talks about the importance of finding, the right head placement.
Yeah,
So if the head is too far forward, it can put pressure on the throat and restrict the breath.
right.
But if it's too far back, it can put strain on the neck.
So it's that Goldilocks principle again, finding that sweet spot where it feels both stable and comfortable.
Exactly. And he reminds us that even in a challenging inversion like headstand, the breath is still our guide.
Okay. I can see how breathing might be challenging in headstand.
Right.
It's hard enough to breathe deeply when you're upside down,
Right.
let alone trying to like engage your core and maintain all these different alignment points.
Right. But he emphasizes the importance of finding a smooth, even breath,
Okay.
even if it's not a deep breath.
Okay.
And he suggests focusing on the exhale, which can help to lengthen the spine and create more space in the chest.
So even in headstand, we're still coming back to those foundational principles of alignment, engagement, and breath. It's amazing how those principles apply to every pose, no matter how challenging.
It's true. And you know what? We've covered so much ground today.
We have.
From the smallest unit of the body, the cell, all the way to those impressive and often intimidating inversions.
Yeah, it's really incredible.
It is. And I think, what I hope listeners will take away from this deep dive into yoga anatomy
Yeah.
is a deeper appreciation for the incredible intelligence and complexity of their own bodies.
Yes.
I hope they'll feel inspired to, approach their yoga practice with a sense of curiosity
Yeah.
and a willingness to explore.
Yes.
And I hope they'll remember that yoga is not about achieving the perfect pose.
It's so true.
It's about listening to our bodies,
Yeah.
honoring our limitations, and celebrating the journey.
I love that.
Yeah.
Beautifully said. And, I think as Kaminoff reminds us, every time we step onto our mats, we have this opportunity to learn something new about ourselves, both physically and mentally.
Exactly. It's a lifelong practice of exploration and discovery.
And with that, we've come to the end of our deep dive into yoga anatomy. I hope you're feeling as inspired and energized as I am to take this newfound knowledge onto our mats and see what new insights we can uncover.